How's it going, everyone? And welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we check out great theories and concepts and discoveries that are very impactful, that would really help you with your improving spiritual, mental, and physical health, your personal sovereignty and independence. But these are things that have been suppressed and things that um, you probably don't know about because of that. These are things that the powers that be don't want you to know. And this is number 404 of our Bible Decode series. And this is stuff that your priest, pastor, minister, or rabbi will not tell you and probably doesn't know themselves and has probably labeled you as a troublemaker just for asking. Nonetheless, as a truther, that is your responsibility to ask the questions that you don't know the answers to, and to be curious and to be dogged in finding out the answers. Be willing to dig, and that means dig physically into the archives, but also to dig emotionally and mentally, because sometimes the answers are hard to come by, esoteric. They are things that, you have to really think about. And then they are also emotionally difficult because sometimes they expose erroneous beliefs that you have held dear. So this is not a pom pom channel. This is uh, for people who are really looking for the truth about stuff. And in many of the earlier Bible Decode videos on this channel, we have explored many aspects of the uh, Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. And that is that the Romans are the true authors of the New Testament. The New Testament was a psyop, a psychological operation that the Romans were running against the Jews, meaning that the New Testament is fiction. It never happened. Or at least, it could be based on a true story, but judging by the story, it's more likely based on dozens and dozens of true stories that have kind of been snippeted together. And that's what we're going to get into here. Now, the Romans were motivated to run a psychological operation against the Jews because the Jews had been a big pain, headache for the Romans for over 100 years, ever since the Romans occupied Judea. The Jews were, because of their kind of irreconcilable beliefs, they were just way more high maintenance than any other group of people that the Romans ruled over. They had these separate, they believed that they were the chosen people. They had these separatist rituals and beliefs that they were willing to die for. And this was all um, leading to constant revolts, conflicts, uprisings, insurrections, and then culminating in a flat out war that happened in 66 AD when some self proclaimed Jewish messiahs, responding to Old Testament prophecies for a Jewish Messiah that was going to come and be a military leader to overthrow the colonial power, or the occupying power in Judea. And that literally happened, um, causing the Roman puppet ruler to be deposed from his leadership in Judea and flee back to Rome, leaving the Jews with a fleeting moment of, independence until Emperor Nero sent in the Roman army under General Vespasian. And it took the Romans 7 years to put down the revolt. And after the revolt was over, General Vespasian had become the new emperor, and his son Titus uh, was appointed as the new military general. He eventually becomes the emperor after Vespasian. And so both of them were wounded in the war, and both of them were motivated that such a thing would never happen again. And so they concocted, along with their, intellectuals at the court there at Caesar's palace, they concocted a fictional story of a Jewish Messiah who, instead of being a military commander, was a prince of peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar and walking the extra mile and turning the other cheek. At the same time that this Jewish Messiah was uh, ruthlessly critical of the Jewish traditions and rituals when he overturned the tables of the Jewish money changers and castigated the Jewish merchants for selling small animals at the temple. Um, and throughout the Gospels, you will never see Jesus do anything against the Romans, but you will see him do many things against the Jews. And then Paul is even more explicit in this operation that the Romans were operating against the Jews. We're looking at a work here from Kersey Graves, from an 1876 book that he has called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And this looks at kind of the source material that the Romans used. Now, Graves is not aware of the Roman origins hypothesis way back in 1876, but he documents the sources that the Romans used to piece together the story of Jesus. All of the episodes in Jesus's life and all of the themes of his ministry are um, uh, um, taken from older material, um, from the Egyptians, from the Persians, from the Indians, from the Chinese, from the Japanese, from the Roman, from the Greek, from the mystery schools, from the shamans, from the astrologers, from the numerologers or numerologists, from the Jews. All of it was kind of in play, and it was all pieced together because, the Romans were doing a limited hangout. They had to make it look like a religion. So they had to put stuff in there that is pious and righteous and things that you can build your life around. You have to remember that the Romans wanted you to be a good person. They wanted you to be a hardworking, honest, productive citizen. That's what they want. They wanted you to be low maintenance because the Romans controlled such a far-flung area and so many different groups of people that they just didn't have the manpower to police everybody the way that they policed the Jews. And so, they wanted to turn the Jews into low maintenance people. They use the terminology of pruning, um, domesticating, uh, taming, as in part of it, because this is all a satire. There's a lot of satire, a lot of parody, when you kind of learn how to interpret what's going on. The first thing that you need to interpret what's going on is to read the works of Josephus, 7-volume work, War of the Jews, and then compare that with the Gospels. And you will see that they were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason, and that they are intended to really be read together. And so that is part of the satirical system that the Romans set up. It is incredibly intricate and complicated, and I don't understand all of it, but to the extent that I do understand it, it's relatively devastating, or I would even say overwhelmingly devastating. The Romans meant business, and they are ruthless in their use of ridicule, mockery, um, humiliation of the Jews as often as possible. You could tell that they had a deep seated hatred for the Jews. And that is all reflected in the New Testament. But usually you only can kind of figure it out if you use the New Testament in conjunction with Josephus. Okay, now Graves, we are in chapter 31, and we're kind of getting bogged down in this chapter. This chapter has to do with his argument that um, the Christianity is directly uh, indebted to the Essenes. And the Essenes were this sect of very pious Jews who were very ascetic, disciplined, simple, and they didn't believe in marriage or family. They wore white. They ate very simply, and they prayed all day and this kind of thing. Um, Unfortunately, what Graves doesn't recognize is that the Essenes never existed either. The only people that it's also a Roman part of the Roman psyop. The only people in history that have ever um, had firsthand encounters with the Essenes are Philo Judaeus of Alexandria, Pliny the Younger, and um, Josephus. So these are all people that are part of the Roman royal network. So they don't, they have to be taken with a grain of salt because you know that they're all in on it with this psychological operation. So they created the entire concept of the Essenes, and Graves doesn't know that, and so he goes through a lot of pains to compare the Essenes with the Christians, and it's kind of like comparing one ghost with another or something like that. Um, but we're going to get through the rest of his chapter, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay. Now, hard indeed must distorted reason fight the ramparts of logic and history to resist the conviction, in view of the foregoing facts, that Christianity is simply an outcropping of Essenism, either direct or through Buddhism. And even if it were possible to prove that the two religions never became welded together, yet it is not possible to disprove the striking identity of their doctrines, and the spirit of their precepts, and the practical lives of their disciples. And this identity, coupled with the fact that Essenism is the older system, is of itself most superlatively fatal to all pretension or claim to originality for the doctrines of the Christian faith. It is a matter of no importance whether Christianity was originally known by another name, so long as it can be shown that its doctrines had all been preached and proclaimed to the world centuries prior to the date assigned for its origin. And this is proved by the long list of parallelisms presented in the incipient pages of this chapter. And this proof explodes the pretensions of Christianity to an original divine revelation and brings it down to a level with pagan Orientalism. And the fact that it sprang up in a country where its doctrine had long been taught by pagans Christians and Orientalists must produce the conviction, deep and indelible in all unbiased minds, that Orientalism was the mother and heathenism the father of the Christian religion, even in the absence of any other proof. In fact, no other proof can be needed. And what are the arguments, it may be well here to inquire, with which Orthodox Christians attempt to meet, combat, and vanquish the overwhelming mass of historical facts and historical testimonies we have presented in preceding pages, tending to prove and demonstrate the Oriental origin of argument. Oriental origin of their religion and its identity with Essenism. Their whole argument is comprised in the naked postulate of the Reverend Mr. Prideaux that, quote, the Essenes did not believe in the resurrection of the physical body, but believed in a spiritual resurrection, and omit from their creed the Trinity and incarnation doctrine, and therefore they could not have been the originators of the Christian religion, end quote. But this argument is as easily demolished as a cobweb, as the following facts will prove. 1. We have but a fragment of the Essenian religion, but one end of their creed, mere scraps furnished us by Philo, Josephus, and Pliny. We have none of their sacred books apart from the Christian New Testament. Okay, so he's showing here that they only have mere scraps furnished us by Philo, Josephus, and Pliny. That's all they have. There's nothing else. And so everything else is just speculation. These three Roman authors really didn't write much about the Essenes. And I think Josephus wrote the most. And Josephus is the most suspect of the three. Well, I won't even say that. They're all totally suspect. But they just provide kind of a shadow of what the Essenes were. And the rest of it is kind of like these scholars' imagination filling the rest of it in. So he's admitting that they really don't know anything about the Essenes. But he thinks he's using that to demolish this other guy's argument that the Essenes were not antecedents of the Christians. Okay, point number 2 is they had secret books, as we have shown, in which doctrines were taught which they regarded as too sacred to be I don't know this word, thrown. Maybe this, thrown. It's just, I can't read it. Like it goes into cursive. The italics is in cursive, whereas the print is not. Okay, the too sacred to be thrown before the public, as pearls before swine. And no doctrines were regarded as more sacred or secret in that age than the doctrines of the Trinity and incarnation. Christ's injunction, see thou tell no man, was probably their motto, which prevented the publicity of a portion of their doctrines. And as their sacred books containing their doctrines perished with the extinction of the sect, a full knowledge of their doctrines therefore never reached the public mind. All religious sects had secret doctrines designated as mysteries of godliness, including the principal Jewish sects and the earliest Christian churches. It is therefore highly probable that if we were in possession of all their sacred books, we would be in possession of the proof that they believed and taught in their monasteries the doctrines above named. But we are not left to mere inference that the Essenes' creed did include the doctrines of the Trinity and the divine incarnation. We find skeletons of these doctrines scattered along the line of their history. Philo himself, an Essene teacher, most distinctly teaches the doctrine of the incarnation of the divine word or logos. And Son of God, mediator, intercessor, and Messiah were familiar words with him. The idea often reappears in his writings that the Word could become flesh, that the Son of God could appear as a personality and return to the bosom of the Father. Moreover, one writer informs us that the Essenes celebrated the birth and death of a divine Savior as a mystery of godliness. And they claimed in their earlier history to be forerunners of the Messiah, a claim which would soon bring a Messiah before the world, that is, lead them to deify and worship some great man as the Messiah. As for the doctrine of the Trinity, we have the authority of Eusebius that they taught this doctrine too, so that it is not true that they did not recognize these two prime articles of the Christian faith, the incarnation and Trinity doctrines. Some modern Christians assert that the Essenes not only omitted to teach these doctrines, but that, on the other hand, they taught other doctrines not taught in the Christian New Testament. This is not improbable, for the Christian religion has been characterized by frequent changes in its doctrines in every stage of its practical history, as was also the Jewish religion which preceded it and from which it emanated. Judaism is a perpetual series of changes. It changed even the name of its God from Elohim to Jehovah. Um, just need to comment that it's usually Yahweh Elohim or Jehovah Elohim. Elohim is the group of people that Jehovah belongs to. And neither of them, both of them are translated as God or Lord God, but neither of them is referring to a God. They're both referring to powerful, giant, highly technological beings that are, um, kind of using the humans as kind of pawns in their little games that they play with the other Elohims. The other Elohims include Baal and Ashtoreth and Shamash and Moloch. Um, those are the competitors of Yahweh. Um, there is really no religion whatsoever in the Old Testament, except for in the first chapter of Genesis. After that, God is replaced by Yahweh Elohim, who is everything but a God, as you can see by his massive, uh, a cache of personality disorders, especially his, anger management issues, his obsessive compulsive disorder, his jealousy and zealousness, and his indecisiveness, his addiction to smoking animal fat, um, and just his arbitrary and capriciousness. But anyway, uh, Judaism is a perpetual series of changes. It changed even the names of its God from Elohim to Jehovah. Its leader and founder, Abraham, or Abram, was changed to Abraham, and his grandson and ancestor from Jacob to Israel. And we have the works of many Christian writers in our possession who prove by their own Bible that the Jews made many changes in their religious polity and religious doctrines. This is more especially observable when they came in contact with nations teaching a different religion. Their whole history shows they were prone to imitate and borrow, and always did borrow on such occasions, and engraft the new doctrines thus obtained into their own creed, and thus effected important changes in their religion. We have the authority of Dr. Campbell for saying the Jews never believed and taught the doctrine of future punishment and other doctrines that might be named till after they were brought in contact with Persians in Babylon who had long taught these doctrines. And Dr. Enfield declares their theological opinions underwent thorough changes during this period of 70 years captivity. Even their national title was changed at one period from Israelites to Jews. With all these changes of names, titles, and doctrines in view, it is not incredible that one of the Jewish sects should change its name from Essenes to Christians, and with this change modify some of the doctrines, and more especially as their title, according to Dr. Ginsburg, had been changed before from Hasidim to Essenes. And Philo, at one period, calls them therapeutes, while Eusebius says the therapeutes were Christians. Put this and that together, and the question is forever settled. I'd say that's a massive overstatement. Put this and that together, and we have a hypothesis. But that question is not forever settled. Now, with all this overwhelming mass of historical evidence before us, I wouldn't go that far either. I would say it's skeletal evidence at best, um, piled mountain high, tending to prove the truth of the proposition that Christianity is the offspring and outgrowth of ancient Judean Essenism. We feel certain that no sophistry from interested charlatans or stereotyped creed worshippers can stave off or obliterate the conviction in unprejudiced minds that the proposition is most amply proven. We will now collate Christianity with another ancient religious system, which we are certain it will not be disputed, after the comparison is critically examined, contains the sum total of the doctrines and teachings of Christianity in all their details. Okay, that is finally the end of chapter 31. And yeah, he kind of loses some credibility with me with that chapter. Not because he doesn't know that the Essenes did not exist, or at least couldn't conceive of that, but that he is actually convinced by the evidence of using a bunch of secondary sources to make his points. If he had just used Philo, Josephus, and Pliny, he wouldn't have been able to make those points. But he piles on Eusebius and Ginsburg and some of these other scholars that were not there and that are secondary sources, and they are speculating. And so he's piling one speculation upon another, and then he adds all those up and he calls it a mountain of evidence. So that is troubling. Now, this next chapter is called Christ and Krishna, 346 striking analogies between Christ and Krishna. And we will probably not get into all 346 tomorrow, but we'll probably get started with that. And thanks for tuning in today. Like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and come back tomorrow to learn about Christ and Krishna from Kersey Graves' 16 Crucified Saviors on the Bible Decode series. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a wonderful day.